Yo, what's shaking, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Orange Bloods Texas Football Channel. It's a Monday, which means it's time for a Monday Overreaction show. I'm Geoff Ketchum. That's Anwar Richardson. Do all the things that we ask you to do, like the video, subscribe to the channel. It's been a little slow since signing day. Don't let the fact that it's not, we got another signing day coming up. So subscribe to the channel. You don't want to miss all of the fun that we'll have up until the second signing day. We're going to be talking about our overreactions today. I'm sure we've got some NFL thoughts from what might have been the greatest four-game NFL playoff weekend in the history of the sport. Like, that might be hyperbole, Anwar. You know what I mean? Like, I might be forgetting some days, but for every single game to come down to the final play of the game, and then Sunday, and to have the Kansas City Buffalo game go the way that it did. Real quick, I think I want to take credit for that, because at 23-21 in the fourth quarter, I turned to my wife and said, there's no way there's going to be overtime, so at least we've got that going for us. And they were up 2, and I was like doing all the math in my head, and I was like, okay, well, this thing's not going to overtime because it's not a 3-point lead. It's not a 7-point lead. It's a 2-point lead, and that guaranteed that the game went into overtime. I have a big Monday overreaction. It's not NFL related. So the question I have for you, Anwar, is do you want to talk about the NFL for a little bit and then go into the Monday overreaction, or you want to jump right into the Monday overreaction?
Monday overreaction, we'll put NFL in the back. Have we still got Rogue as a sponsor?
We do. Thank you for saying that. This episode of the Monday Overreaction podcast brought to you by, I guess, the show, also a podcast, I guess, brought to you by Rogue Apothecary, therogueshop.com. I'm sure you can see it. It's labeled above our heads or below our heads. It's on the screen. Thanks to the guys over at Rogue Apothecary for being the sponsor of the Monday Overreaction show. Man, I'm having a hard time talking. All right, you ready for this overreaction?
Let's do it.
The Longhorns miss out on Latavious Brini, the Georgia DB transfer, who visited Texas Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, and then announced on Sunday that he was going to Arkansas. And a bit surprising, to say the least. I think that Arkansas insiders and Texas insiders, including myself, and national insiders, kind of everybody that was following that thing, thought that Brini would end up at Texas. You had a chance to speak to Brini a couple of times over the course of the last few days. When the announcement came in, it was a bit of a surprise, right? We're all on the same page.
A little bit surprised, yeah.
So here's my overreaction. The entire 2022 season for the Longhorns will hinge on the Longhorns recovering from the loss of Brini and being able to finish out their transfer portal business with players like Brini and O'Shawn Mathis, who we talked about, the TCU edge rusher who's in the portal. Texas's ability to have a season that keeps Steve Sarkisian off the hot seat is completely connected to its ability to do good in the transfer portal on the defensive side of the ball with its last 2 or 3 spots. And if they can't do that, my overreaction is I don't know what this season is going to become. Like, this is a team that's suddenly loaded with offensive skill personnel, running back, wide receiver, maybe even quarterback. But it's still a defense that lacks playmakers. It's still the defense, I think, more than anything else, that really hamstrung the Texas Longhorns as a whole. Like, they beat Kansas last year, Anwar. If they could just stop a soul. I look at the Texas defense right now, and it's still a defense that doesn't have a pass rush. It's still a defense that has questions about who its inside linebacker is next to DeMarvion Overshown. It still has questions about the secondary. It still has questions about playmakers. It still has questions about whether or not Pete Kwiatkowski is going to be able to make this thing happen. So I think I was going to show up on Monday had the Longhorns landed Brini, and I think I would have been one step closer to thinking, okay, 8-9 wins, here we come. Now, there's a lot of questions in this program, but man, there's a lot of questions about the defense. And front and center is its ability to add better personnel. It's not there yet.
Well, it's interesting because I'm trying to think, which one is the bigger loss, Drew Sanders or Brini? And, both of them are big.
Yes.
Right? Because, they're so, because Sanders, the former Alabama linebacker, is a guy that you looked and said, that's plug and play. You go ahead and put that guy in, let him turn him loose, and he instantly makes that linebacker core better. Brini from a defensive back perspective is something that, like you said, with some of the losses that Texas had, that guy is probably, you plug and play. That's an instant starter, and then kind of giving yourself a little bit of hope. What we're seeing, Ketch, is this Texas team doesn't seem to have, and this staff doesn't seem to have any issues picking up offensive guys in the portal. If it's an offensive guy, for the most part, they're going to be played, especially for a skill position. They've seen Isaiah Nayor get it added. Jaleel Billingsley is another person who's been added. So we see the offensive, like that's not the problems. The defensive side of it, like we're waiting. The way O'Shawn Mathis is saying, okay, I'll take a wait and see approach and see if I can come in. Like, if you don't get him, and O'Shawn, goes somewhere else, then you're really saying, like, okay, like that. Now you start looking at defense. Okay, how does this defense improve? Because for the most part, while the offense did struggle at times last year, we don't look at it and say the offense is the reason why this team wasn't good last year. The defense was the reason why this team wasn't good last year. And Gary Patterson, we'll see what kind of impact that he had, but being able to add in guys like Brini, add in guys like Sanders, add in a guy like Mathis, this is what instantly makes your defense better. So, I mean, yeah, if at the end of the day, we're looking at it and saying, okay, they didn't add in a lot of huge pieces. Now, they did add in the guy from Ohio State, so I don't want to overlook him, Ryan Watts. And, and that guy is a guy that has high upside, but being able to add in a bunch of stuff. If we're going into it and we're saying, okay, you got Ryan Watts and some other guys that we got to see if they develop, then it becomes a shoulder shrug as to what the expectations should really be for the upcoming season.
Yeah, I mean, this is a team that if you tell me they get Brini, Mathis, and Sanders in the portal, you've improved your personnel, your starting personnel with proven players at all three levels of the defense. And Ryan Watts isn't quite that. He may turn out to be the best player of all those guys when it's all said and done, but it might not come together for him right away in 2022. I think one of the things that makes him such an attractive player is that he's got eligibility. And technically, because of the COVID season in 2020, he's got 3 years of eligibility left, a minimum of 2. I just, I'm not sounding the alarm bells. This isn't me panicking. This isn't me yelling fire in a crowded theater. This is just simply looking at, we think this Texas offense is going to be a lot better. And we think it's going to be better in part because they've added the quarterback that seemingly Steve Sarkisian wants to turn to, and Quinn Ewers. They've added an Isaiah Nayor who, you can at least make a case he and Xavier Worthy are in the top 5-ish of 1-2 wide receiver punches in college football. I mean, I'll take Xavier Worthy over just about anybody. So, you've got that going. You just needed to partner him with a guy that can play, and you've got a 1-2 punch that you can feel really good about. You add Billingsley, like the offense. Oh, by the way, Bijan Robinson. Oh, by the way, that deep running back room. You've got a tight end room that even before Billingsley showed up is loaded with young talent that can play. It's about turning that young talent into players instead of potential. It's the defensive side of the ball. This was a defense that didn't get to the quarterback a year ago, that didn't really create turnovers, that couldn't get off the field. And while they signed a monstrous recruiting class that I think could potentially give them some help with the pass rush, I can see a number of the guys, whether it's Jamon Tapp or Justice Finkley, coming in and being impact freshmen right away. What does that mean? Being an impact freshman might mean you get 4 or 5 sacks out of them and they're freshman All-Americans. It doesn't mean that it's a guy you can hitch your wagons to over 12 games to get to the quarterback consistently. I still don't know what to think about an inside linebacker position. That Texas was so bad stopping the run a year ago. And it's clear that Texas wants an upgrade at linebacker. They tried a year ago and missed out with a kid from USC who ended up going to Ohio State and whose name I'm not even going to try to pronounce because it's been like 9 months since I tried Anwar, and like I just don't want to. And he didn't play at Ohio State, so like there's no real reason yet for me to remember his name. They tried to go with the kid from Central Michigan. I mean, they've tried to go after the kid from UNLV, Jacoby Windman. They've gone after linebackers that would help this exact area. It's not in place yet. And then when we look at the secondary, that one is one of the strangest things about this Texas defense a year ago, is that on paper, they've got good players. I mean, we were talking this time last year about Deshaun Jameson's NFL upside. And the season ends and we weren't anymore. Anthony Cook had a really good season. You add a Ryan Watts, you can start to see the makings of a good secondary. But you know what makes a secondary good? A good pass rush. Mm-hmm. You know what can make good secondary guys look bad? Not getting to the quarterback. So, and so the ability for Texas to get to the quarterback, defend the pass, and defend the run are all major question marks for this team going into the spring. It's just my way of saying it's imperative that Texas misses on Brini yesterday. There will be other guys that go into the portal between now and August that Texas will be in on. They've got to find a way to get some improvements in there come hell or high water, because if you can do that, I think by the time you and I get to July and August, if you can tell me that they get Mathis as a pass rusher, they add a veteran secondary piece that's, let's say, started multiple seasons and is a proven guy, and then you find a way to find that inside linebacker that you need so that you're not starting Luke Brockermeyer or waiting for Jalen Ford to grow up and turn into a truly plus player, I'll feel a lot better about what I think the season record for this team is going to look like. As it stands, we haven't even mentioned Quinn Ewers' name and like his development as a major. I'm kind of giving that some benefit of the doubt, and I'm kind of ignoring the offensive line for a moment, because if this defense doesn't get better, I don't know that Texas is going to be more than a team that plays in a bunch of 50-50 games. And if you're in 6 50-50 games and you split them, you're talking about a 9-3 type of season, maybe 8-4. Maybe if all of your luck goes well, you're at 10-2, but that feels like a massive leap. I don't feel like that kind of massive leap can be made unless Pete Kwiatkowski has a defense that can hold up its end of the bargain. And we're just not there right now. It's essentially the same personnel as a year ago with a couple of true freshmen sprinkled in. And I think that, the key to this season that will unlock potentially a really good second season for Steve Sarkisian is going back and finding somebody to fill the void that Latavious Brini leaves and not coming to Texas. And then you've got to find a way to get that pass rusher and that linebacker. Simple as that.
Yeah, it's, for me, the biggest question on offense is the offensive line, right? With, like you said, there's also a smaller question mark, maybe potentially for the quarterback position. But when I look at the defensive side, I've got question marks at just about every position on that side of the ball. I mean, is that to say they don't have players? There's definitely guys who are players. Keandre is a player, and you've got players at linebacker with DeMarvion and Jalen Ford, Moro Jomo back up front. Sorry to forget you, Moro. You've got some guys you look at and say, okay, those are players. But when you say as a unit, you got questions on every part of it. And then the question then becomes, okay, is it about developing those guys and PK getting the most out of them? Is it about Gary Patterson coming in and bringing new ideas in, and will those ideas be received in meetings, and will there be any pushback off of that? I mean, he's there for that, you know, kind of special consultant role. You know, how much listening and how much clout and everything will he say, like who answers to who within that equation, you know, is in practice, is Gary Patterson saying, all right, I'm just sitting here and then I'll give my opinions afterwards? Is he giving them right now during practice? You know, all those kind of things. You know, the defense does become, still remains a question mark. Not obtaining some of the guys, a little bit concerning, you know, because, you know, you're basically seeing a bunch of veteran guys who are saying like, I'm going to go to different places. I don't know if Texas is used to losing guys to Arkansas in head-to-head battles, but that's happened twice over the last few weeks. That's not.
So it's a relatively new thing.
Yeah. I mean, we don't think of Arkansas as like, you know, a recruiting powerhouse. You know, you say, okay, Texas loses to Ohio State or Bama or something to that effect, or maybe to A&M, you might be able to sell that. Arkansas is different, because that was a team where we were looking at last year, Ketch, you know, coming off of, what was it, a 3-win season, 2-win season, whatever it was, heading into the year. And that was one of those you go, Arkansas is a bottom feeder. And Arkansas didn't have the greatest of seasons, but didn't have a season enough where you felt like that will be the landing spot and destination for elite guys.
Shout out to Sam Pittman. Like, that wasn't a hire that made so much as a ripple in college football, let alone the state of Texas. But man, he's got that program playing well. And to see them come in and beat Texas for two kids, Drew Sanders and Latavious Brini, but then Oklahoma was in the middle of that. On one hand, I think a lot of that just has to do with the SEC. One of the things I first thought about Brini before it looked like he was going to end up at Texas is all the kids that have any juice at all that are transferring from SEC schools, they're transferring to other SEC schools. And one of the things that was really interesting about Brini is that he had an SEC option, and that at the end of last week, it looked like Texas was going to be the call. And that would have broken this kind of new rule that I'm building, which is you better be in the SEC if you want to get the good SEC transfers. And, you know, people want to know why Brini didn't pick Texas. I think that has to be a part of it. SEC players want to be in the SEC. It's viewed as big boy football. And one of the things that Brini wants is the reason why he's making this move is he wants to play on Sundays, and he lost his job at Georgia. I think that it would have been somewhat of a surprise to see him land at Texas, even though I thought he would at the end, because of this thing. To see him ultimately pick Arkansas, it makes me think, okay, at the end of the day, he didn't want to leave the SEC. And then B, it does make me think, like, what kind of NIL deal or whatever did Arkansas potentially find for him? Because we live in this world now, especially with players from the portal. It's a jungle out there. It is it's as if a jungle met the wild, wild west. Imagine Wyatt Earp swinging from a vine. That is recruiting in the portal. And to see Brini end up at Arkansas after the Texas visit, what I know Texas would have been talking to him about, you know, this is an NIL, like this is the home of the NIL in a lot of ways. They would have been telling him, you have earning potential here. My guess is Arkansas also talked to him about earning potential. And the combination of those things together probably, in my mind, lead to Brini picking Arkansas over Texas.
Yeah. And so, you know, now it's, you know, I guess it's now we just wait for Mathis at this point. You really wait for Mathis. And then after that, Ketch, you just, you know, Texas has to wait to see what happens after the spring, you know, because the practices are getting ready to get started, you know, for off-season condition, rather.
Yeah.
It's started. So at this point, if there aren't any guys that outside of Mathis, I don't know if there's any other major guys that Texas is in on. So now it's really waiting to see if anything else happens after the spring. But that probably requires a guy losing his spot on the depth chart at that program. And then you kind of, going from there. So it seems like at this moment, Texas will have to work with what it has. And really, it becomes really catch about the development aspect of, all right, this is what you have. This is what you have to work with. You've got, one guy that came in and you got a bunch of freshmen and you've just got to develop them. Like it's just that pure, it's that simple, it's that easy. This will be an off season of development for the staff where they've got to take, let's not act like, let's just be honest, Ketch. Let's not act like they inherited a JUCO roster. They inherited a good roster. It's not like you look at it and say, man, there's no way you can win with these bums. Like they're not bums. They're good players. They just have to be cultivated, have to be developed. And that's the thing that has always been the challenge, I think, that comes from, I've seen coaches here at Texas, is being able to develop them. Now, the tricky part is, Ketch, you don't have a lot of time in today's college football to say, I want to develop a guy for 3 years. Not when coaches are getting fired after 3 seasons. Those days of, hey, let me just sit you, redshirt you, develop you, and maybe by your junior or senior year. No, they need guys to come in right away who can contribute right away. They don't those luxuries. It just, guys are getting fired after 2 seasons. One season, sometimes in 1 season. You don't have you've got to have guys. So it's almost going to have to be quick development. So when I say development, I don't necessarily mean 4 years down the line, because I mean like this year, because if it doesn't happen this year, 2 things will happen, Ketch. We'll start hearing about hot seat. You'll start having assistant coaches start bailing because they're like, ooh, I don't know what's going on with this hot seat thing. Let me get a job now, but it'll give me another 3 years before I got one and maybe I'll be one and done. So the development and AK quick development has to happen this year.
Yeah, I think you've made a number of really notable points that are worthy of just a quick follow-up. I think you're right about the development. I think if you're a Texas defensive player, if you're Jalen Ford, if you're any of those DBs, if you're any of these, look, if you are a Prince Dorba and you want to be a factor in this program, you better start to show some juice before this freshman class really shows up on campus in a big, big way. Now, you've got a few guys who are already on campus, all right? So we're going to be paying attention to Justice Finkley throughout the spring. He's going to get his opportunity. And maybe all of this looks slightly different when we get to the spring, but I think we'll all take lessons from what we learned a year ago by practice reports. This time last year, the defensive line for Texas was viewed internally and by everybody in the program to be a massive strength, mainly because it was whipping a poor offensive or an average at best offensive line. All we eventually learned was, okay, they were just better than that. But it wasn't a great barometer for where that defensive line truly was. So I think you're right about the talent. I think the thing to note about the portal moving forward is that we've gone through the big first rush. So guys that want to be on the January crowd of guys that wanted to make their transfers and be in school for the spring, that's almost completely over. Now, the O'Shawn Mathises of the world don't have to make decisions imminently because they can't be anywhere until June anyway. So it just all slows down a little bit. This, for me, is where if you're Texas, you have to go force a couple of Isaiah Neyor transfer type situations. Neyor, in part, picks Texas because he's a Texas guy. If Isaiah Neyor was from California, all bets are off. Like maybe he goes to USC, maybe he just goes closer to home. There's a lot of maybes involved in that. But we know that Texas is at its best in the transfer portal when they're targeting guys who are originally from Texas. I mean, Quinn Ewers, originally from Texas. Ryan Watts, originally from Texas. Isaiah Nayer, originally from Texas. Billingsley is like the only wild card out of all that, hailing from Chicago. If you're Texas, what you've got to do between now and May is you got to illegally tap up some kids. You have to find out where is an edge rusher or a defensive back or an inside linebacker with a Texas background who's kicking ass at, I don't want to say a lower level, but yeah, a lower level. And you got to get the word out of, hey, if you enter the portal, you have a home here. So if there's some kid at San Jose State or Wyoming or wherever who's originally from the state of Texas that didn't get an offer when he was a high school prospect, but is proven to be a good college player, and you think on paper absolutely upgrade your roster, you got to get the word out to that kid's high school coach. You got to get the word to his family, trainers, whatever you have to do. I think in the next couple of months, if you're Texas, you've got to comb the country for players produced from your home state that are having success elsewhere. That is where the portal is such a huge weapon for Texas in ways that it's not even for a school like Alabama. Like Alabama's got like its own, they just cherry pick. But the thing that Alabama doesn't get to cherry pick, there's not like a bunch of kids in Alabama from the state scattered all over the country that they can then come back to. Texas, USC has this, the schools in Florida have this. They're from the super states. LSU will have this. You know, per capita, the kids in Louisiana develop into NFL players better than anywhere, but they don't all go to LSU. Some of them go to schools like Louisiana. And what have we seen LSU do this year? In this offseason, they've cherry-picked guys from rosters inside the state of Louisiana. So I think the biggest advantage that Texas has in the portal is that they can represent a homecoming and a payday and a bigger platform for kids from this state who've scattered all over the country. Texas has to go find those kids. And I jokingly said they have to illegally tap them up. They got to live in the gray area, right? You can't contact the kid technically and just say, hey, if you want to enter the portal, we've got a place for you. But if that kid has a trainer, you probably need to contact that dude and be like, hey, how are all your kids doing? Oh, yeah, you've got so-and-so who's a linebacker at Utah State. We could really use him. Wink, wink. You got to do whatever it takes to fill those three positions. You have to find an edge rusher. And because here's the other thing, man. If they don't get Mathis, I feel like we're almost taking that one for granted. Pass rushers don't grow on trees in the portal. Mathis is such a critically important piece because he's so hard to find, guys with that profile. It's going to make him heavily desired by more than just Texas. That kid's going to have a lot of choices. And it's imperative that Texas get him, but if they don't, the dream of improving the pass rush can't just end there. I think Texas has to be really proactive. They have to be on the forefront. They have to be on the front foot of what's allowed in the portal. And, what is the old classic saying about what good luck is when opportunity meets preparation. This is where Texas needs to A, prepare, and B, create some opportunities. And if they do that every single year, the portal just has a chance to be a massive weapon for them in terms of both rebuilding, which they're in now, and fine-tuning once they eventually get good.